Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian, and we are covering the 29th Annual Surface Navy Association's Conference and Trade Show here in Northern Virginia. Raytheon is our sponsor for this event, and we are honored to have with us the Vice Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Bill Moran. Sir, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, Vago. Great to be here.
Absolutely, and you had a fascinating message that you delivered in your address today. Telling people to sort of tamp down their expectations about the amount of money that's going to be coming through, and also saying that in your message to the transition team, the service is basically saying, look, let's put readiness ahead of everything else. Not saying that the shipbuilding isn't important, but readiness is key. Obviously, you can't talk about the 17 budget or the 18 budget. You guys haven't gotten that guidance yet, but can you tell us, within that, what are the top 3 or 5 priorities that you guys are passing on to the new team to say, look, here are the absolute things that we have to focus on from day one?
Yeah, I think the first one is readiness, and so it's both afloat and ashore readiness. We've taken some risk in the last several years on both accounts to pay for deployments, to pay for building ships and other things, all important for the future of the Navy. So readiness is clearly at the top of our list. The second one, the CNO's been pretty clear on, is making sure that we get Ohio replacement funded and on its way to contract and delivery. That's a national strategic asset. We've run out of life on Ohio. There's no more wiggle room in the schedule, so we have to do that. But that takes a big piece of our strategic SCN account to build ships across the force. So we've been talking about getting money above our TOA in order to pay for that strategic nuclear deterrent. So that's a priority. We've got to make sure that happens. I would say the other priorities are a mix of a lot of things. So cyber is on everybody's radar. It's on our radar. The health of our recruiting and retention force continues to be something we pay close attention to. And then all of the issues associated with building a strong team, the training piece, the agendas that come with making sure we address suicide and sexual assault, and all of those other priorities remain there. So I think the big ones, though, are as I said in my talk, we need a bigger Navy. We need a Navy that's whole, and then we need to make sure that our people matter the most. So we got to make sure we protect that aspect of our Navy.
Do you expect to still be making very hard trade-offs? I mean, there are some folks who are already warning. Budget Control Act may not be going away anytime soon, or not nearly as quickly as people think, and that the money taps may not increase as much. Obviously, there are a lot of other competitors in that budget. The Obamacare, if it's scrapped and there are extra costs, Republicans appear to be willing to bear that cost, but that money is going to have to come out of somewhere. Do you guys have a prioritized list of extra tough decisions that will still have to be, you think, made even within the course of this year?
Yeah, so we're like running with scissors in the Pentagon right now. We don't have a clear path on 17. We hear rumors of an amended 17 budget that may give us some more money that, like I said, we'll throw at readiness because that's where we can execute it. 18 will be handed off here very shortly from one administration to the next. We'll probably have to relook at that depending on where the new administration top line comes out. And then, of course, we're doing 19 as we speak because we got to get ready for that. Some of them will collapse into one, we hope, because we'd like to just do this once when it comes to 18 and 19 perhaps. But do we have a prioritized list? You betcha. And they'll continue to be revisited in priority order depending on where that top line ends up. So yeah, we absolutely do. I'm not going to share them with you here because some of them are, frankly, quite classified.
Right.
But I can assure you that readiness is going to stay at the top of that list.
But do you think that some tough trade-offs may still be required before you get into a clearer sort of budgetary picture?
The trade-offs that are in the near term are what we can afford in terms of maintenance availabilities and operating the force at the level we are today. And until we get past the CR or we get an amended budget and we have clarity in what that number looks like, we're getting ever and ever closer to having to cancel avails, defer maintenance, just like we've been forced to do over the last several years. We don't want to do that, but until we get that budget clarity, those are the types of trade-offs we've got to make.
How much for how long will be required to dig out of this hole that we're in?
It's really hard to say. I mean, we've I used a couple examples today about how long some of these things are taking. So we've got to dig out from the bow wave of maintenance that's come in. That can be done in, 3 to 5 years. We also have to remember that if we're going to put more money into maintenance, we also got to make sure we have the right workforce in our public yards, and the private yards need time to make sure they bring in enough people to do that work. It's very hard to bring in a very young welder who's never worked on ships. So, if you bring somebody in, hire a new welder, and it's going to take them 2 years to get to the level where they're really being productive. Those are some of the challenges in surging this piece in the next couple of years. But we have to start. We can't wait for this to happen.
One of the other things you said was the need for the Navy to get bigger, that essentially you're in this position for a whole bunch of reasons, but in part because it's a smaller Navy that's being run a lot harder and put away wet. The force structure assessment looked at it on December 15. Secretary Mavis announced that 355 ships. That came as welcome news to the incoming administration that's talked about a 350-ship Navy. John Lehman's been pushing that idea for some time. I'm sure you've heard from him over the years about the importance of that. But now there's analytic rigor that goes behind it. This was a think tank. This was the Navy's own strategic shop and a federally funded research and development center that said, hey, 355 is the right number. Do you think that this plan is going to survive in some fashion and become a blueprint for the force architecture for the future? And how much money is going to be required extra on the SCN budget, on the Navy's shipbuilding budget, to be able to actualize that plan?
Yeah, so just to be clear, the force structure assessment is a Navy product.
Right.
Okay, that's the fleet architecture studies were the 3 that were done that you refer to. We are looking at them both to see how the architecture studies inform our force structure assessment, and then what can we learn from each other, the capabilities that go with that, and then blending that in with, as I described here this afternoon, the concept that Admiral Davidson's working on fleet design, distributed maritime operations, how that connects to the distributed lethality construct that Admiral Roden's been touting in the surface force, and how that all comes together. So the cost to achieve what we think is a really solid number based on all of that work in the mid 300s is about a 15% increase in our top line to be able to afford the added ship construction, aviation, people, and readiness to go with it.
Do you have any sense on what the overall top number is going to be for shipbuilding?
I don't. I mean, you can look historically, and it's around $15 billion a year,
right,
give or take. So add 15 to 20% to that, and you'll get pretty close.
One of the things that also was raised here by one of your company mates was the change. I mean, there's relief here that ratings have been brought back, and that the Navy is going to continue with the educational reforms that we're seeing as important and necessary, but at the same time also giving what sailors have long cherished. You were part of that decision. You've received a lot of feedback. How hard was it to make that U-turn?
It's always hard. It's always hard to take the feedback and then turn around a decision that you collectively spend a lot of time thinking about. But I will tell you, the CNO listened to the feedback. We formed a bunch of working groups in the fleet, and we took that feedback and said, we tout being a learning organization, and if learning means sometimes admitting maybe you didn't get it right, there's nothing wrong with turning it back. And I think CNO viewed what was happening in the rating discussion and the focus on the rating names as a distraction to the larger issues of trying to make our Navy more flexible with more opportunities for our sailors coming in and leaving. And when we talk about that to sailors, the concepts they like, but they didn't like losing their identity in that rating name. And so we give them full credit for that feedback, and we turn it around based on our sailors' input. And was it hard? No. Once we got committed, the CNO and the Secretary said, okay, it's time admit we probably didn't get this right. We didn't get this right, and so let's turn it back and get focused on what we need to be focused on.
I have one last quick question, which is sort of a big question, and it ties into sailors and capabilities. 2 decades ago, we made the decision to sort of outsource a lot of the Navy's support capabilities, where the individual training skills for sailors, and there are folks, and we heard it here today in the panel in the discussion with you, where former commanders time and again said, our sailors used to have the capability to fix some of the stuff that's now needing to be delayed, deferred, and handled in overhaul. How long is it going to take for the Navy to rebuild these kind of core skill sets of self-support, self-sufficiency that have been hallmarks of the service for 240 years?
It's a really complex conversation because the amount of time we're spending in the schools hasn't been cut significantly over time. And our systems have gotten more complex along the same timeline. So our training systems, our methodologies did not modernize at the same rate as the systems. And so we were finding ourselves with chalkboards instead of intelligent systems to help train and virtual systems to help train our sailors along with instructors. So we're putting a lot of effort into that. We realize that we've got to do better. I'll give you a great example here recently where we had a virtualized training system applied to a schoolhouse, traditional schoolhouse, and we took half the class and roughly half the class and said, you're going to get the traditional training and then we want you to go start that piece of gear. And then we put the other half of the class in this virtualized environment with this modern capability and said, over to you, train yourselves, look at it, use the system however you want, and we're going to let you go out and start that same gear. 10% of the ones in the traditional classroom were able to start that piece of gear. 100% of the ones in the virtualized environment who got to do reps and sets and learn at their own pace and be able to repeat and rinse and wash that cycle over and over again, they did pretty well. So now it's not uniform across all these complex rates. I mean, operating on a very sophisticated engine part or radar and some of the other things is going to take a different type. The point is that we're starting to see the benefit of this technology. Where we often run into trouble with the fleet and with our talking to ourselves is that people go, well, that's computer-based training all over again. And it is fundamentally different. We're not getting rid of instructors. We're modernizing the classroom, moving the classroom to the fleet concentration area as opposed to Great Lakes or other places that are away from the waterfront, away from the flight line. That's less effective training. So it's a combination of all those things and buying back some of those shore duty opportunities where their skills are enhanced if they go to work in depots, in SIMAs, all of the places that we used to send sailors but contracted it out, to your point, we found out, hey, learning organization, again, we didn't get that right. So we're buying those billets back so those sailors have a place to go and do what they want to do, which is learn how to be a better technician and a better leader. So that's what we're doing.
Admiral Moran, thanks very much for being so generous with your time as always.
Okay, great to see you, Vago.